Good morning, everybody. We will soon start the meeting. I just would like to briefly go through some rules for the meeting today. So we will start with an introduction by Guillaume Prache on the topic of barriers to shareholder engagement and on the report we will present today. This will be followed by a bigger and a deeper look at the report itself by Christiane Hults from DSW. Then Guillaume Prache will take the floor again to talk about a part of the report talking about neo-brokers. And finally, at the end, Jella Benner-Heinecke will, from DSW as well, will present the policy recommendations. So thank you for joining us. And I would presenters and keep your microphones on mute as long as you're not speaking. We will go for a Q&A session at the very end after the four presentations. So thank you very much, and I give the floor to Jella.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me. Welcome to all of you, and I think it's not too late. Best wishes to you for the new year. I'm very happy to see so many attendees on 6th of January. I know it's difficult, first week of the year. And also we have this Holy Three Kings holiday, but thank you for joining. And I would particularly like to welcome all the journalists, primarily, who attend this conference. It's kind of new and unique for us. Because we have the presentations all in English, but I would also like to address especially the German journalists in German. Und ich möchte ganz kurz auch die Kollegen aus Deutschland begrüßen. Schön, dass Sie dabei sind. Und natürlich haben Sie diesmal das Problem, dass außer der Pressemitteilung der DSW, die ist auf Deutsch, ansonsten alles auf Englisch ist. Ich bitte das zu entschuldigen, aber Sie haben natürlich Gelegenheit, hinterher auch nach den Präsentationen Fragen auf Deutsch zu stellen. Wir würden es auch auf Deutsch beantworten und natürlich stehen Frau Hults und ich Ihnen gerne für Interviews hinterher zur Verfügung. Das machen wir auch am besten direkt nach der Pressekonferenz. So, ladies and gentlemen, I represent DSW, the leading German shareholder association in Germany, together with my colleague Christiane Hults. And I think we should start the whole press conference. And I would like to hand over to Guillaume Prache, who is the managing director of Better Finance, which is our European organization representing round about 4 million private investors. So Guillaume, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Guten Morgen, bonjour. Thanks for coming, as Jella said, for this early January press conference. And thanks again also to all the journalists and the international journalists who are present today. I am, as Jella said, the managing director of Better Finance, the European Federation of Investors and Financial Services Users. And we are very proud to have among our member organizations, DSW of Germany. We just did and will release today a study on the implementation of the new Shareholders Directive rights, which was implemented last September 2020. So last year was the first general meeting season, so to speak, where it applied. And governance, you know, that's the G part of ESG, environmental, social governance matters, is essential. And the biggest driver for governance is shareholder engagement. It's quite important for responsible investment, for corporations taking the long-term view, for sustainable growth, and I would say also for democracy, because that's the way the economy becomes accountable to the end investor. And especially important these days, to ensure the transition of companies to more sustainable economic models, like what happened a few months ago at Exxon, where a shareholder engagement managed to put 3 directors who will push Exxon into an accelerated energy transition. Unfortunately, this study, which was conducted both by DSW and by Better Finance, reveals an alarming situation, and in the vast majority of cases, shareholders were not able to fully or even partially exercise their fundamental rights, especially voting rights at general meeting within the EU. And I must say corporate governance and shareholder engagement is one of the least effective and one of the least digitalized processes, especially cross-border within the EU. And without further ado, I will give the floor to Christiane Hulst, who has been the leader by far in this study, and will give you the details and the explanation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Guillaume, and also from my side, a very warm welcome to all you participants to this press conference. Guillaume has already stated that our research found an alarming situation when it comes to the engagement of shareholders after the Shareholder Rights Directive came into force. I would just, before I give you the results of the survey, I would just briefly explain the situation as it stands. If you are a shareholder and you hold shares, you normally have no direct contact with the issuer, with the company itself, but your shares are being held through an intermediated chain, so to speak, through the banking chain. The problem is that there are various banks, various intermediaries between the shareholder and the issuer. And at the banking level, at the intermediaries level, there have been several problems since ever, and these problems obviously have not been solved by the Shareholder Rights Directive. So first of all, we have a Babylonian jumble of languages, technical languages. The banks do not speak the same languages when it comes to cross-border issues. So the German bank does not understand the messages it receives, for example, from a French bank. Banks do not understand, still do not understand that they have to transpose the new regulations from the Shareholder Rights Directive. And we have different concepts of shareholders. The term shareholder is understood differently in different member states across the EU, which poses additional problems. And overall, the chain is between the issuer and the investor, the shareholder, is very long and complex, and there has been a long-term underinvestment in these processes, general meeting processes. So this is the situation as it stands. The political solution was the implementation of the Shareholder Rights Directive, which, and maybe we can go to the presentation now. Maria, I think you will put it on. So then I will just go on. The Shareholder Rights Directive was supposed to facilitate the exercise of shareholders' rights and forces intermediaries to transmit the information quickly between the issuer and the shareholder and vice versa. So
You see what Vera Jourova, the then commissioner at DG Just, responsible for introducing the Shareholder Rights Directive 2, said the new rules will ultimately make it easier for shareholders resident in another EU country than where the investee company is based to exercise, to participate in the general meeting of such companies and to vote. So let's see how it worked out. We did a research among the Better Finance member organizations and individual shareholders. We covered investors from 13 countries that invested in companies in 11 member states. So quite an impressive coverage from my point of view. On the next slide, you see what we asked from our member organizations and from individual investors was to perform the whole general meeting journey, meaning that getting in touch with their bank or their broker and ask for an admission card and for a voting card. So asking for the right to attend a general meeting, either online or on site, and to be enabled to vote at this general meeting. So SRD 2, the Shareholder Rights Directive, requires no, can we go back please? One slide. The Shareholder Rights Directive requires deposit banks and brokers to inform the shareholder that a general meeting of a share he holds in another member state is taking place. Alternatively, the issuer can directly inform the shareholder. We asked participants, respondents to the survey, from whom did you receive the information about the general meeting in another member state? And 34% said, oh, we received it from the deposit bank or the broker. 7% said we received it directly from the issuer. And an alarming 59% said we did not receive the information at all, neither from the deposit bank nor from the broker or the issuer. Normally, we found them by our own means. So already from the very start of the general meeting journey, there was a lack of information provided to the shareholder. On the next slide, you see the information on the left chart. You see the information that is required to be included in the information to the shareholder. When a bank informs its shareholder, the shareholder about a general meeting, this information must at least include the ISIN, the name, the date, time of the general meeting, the type of the general meeting, so is it an ordinary one, extraordinary one, of course, the location of the general meeting, the record date, which shows the shareholder whether or not he's entitled to vote the shares, and the specific URL to the website of the issuer where the shareholder can find all the necessary information. As you can see, only the name of the issuer and the date of the general meeting were provided to all respondents of the survey. What is very concerning is especially the low information level of record date and specific URL. So in 58% of the cases, the record date was not noted, was not provided to the shareholder. What we could say is, if you don't get all the information, at least if it's possible to find this information easily on the website of the issuer without undue searching, that is also fine. But as you can see on the right hand side of this slide, Only in 46% of the cases, respondents said the information was really easily accessible with a few clicks and without undue searching. On the next slide, we asked respondents, so wherever you got the information from, but finally, did you manage to obtain an admission card that enables you to participate in the general meeting, either virtual or on site? And only 22% said, yes, we finally managed to obtain such an admission ticket. And only 34% finally managed to, to vote at the general meeting. You see these figures are diverging significantly, so a bit more than shareholders were enabled to vote. Fewer were enabled to participate in a general meeting. So of course we asked for the reasons for that. And a large number said the intermediary, my bank, my broker, only offered me proxy voting services. So of course we thought maybe this is the main reason for this is the COVID restrictions, which hindered gatherings of shareholders in many member states. But this was only part of the explanation. In other cases, shareholders said no, it was just proxy voting services that we were offered. Other solutions, other means of participation were not provided at all. On the next slide. There is another alarming part, another alarming result we found in our study. Shareholder Rights Directive 2 says that fees for voting in another member state shall be non-discriminatory and shall be duly justified. So we asked respondents to the survey, did the bank charge any fees for providing you the information about a general meeting? And in half of the cases, participants to the survey said, yes, we were charged fees, or we are going to be charged fees. The amount of fees differed significantly, as you can see on the right side. In some cases, shareholders were asked to pay up to 250 euros per ballot per general meeting, which is of course a significant deterrent, especially for individual shareholders to execute their right to participate or to vote in a general meeting. We should keep in mind that voting nationally, so for example within Germany, voting at a general meeting, participating to a general meeting is normally free of charge for the private investor. So why is there such a high amount of fees required from the shareholders when it comes to voting internationally or within the EU? This is contrary, in my view, to the idea of the single market. So next and last slide from my side. We asked respondents, overall, did you consider the process to attend and vote at a general meeting easy? And only 21% said, yes, we considered the process easy. Main reasons for this devastating result is that reasons that were provided were that respondents said, we didn't get a good or no service at all from our intermediaries. We had the impression, that was responses from many participants, they said, we had the impression that the intermediaries, the last intermediaries, were not aware of their obligations and did not really know what to do. They wanted to help us, but they had no idea how they could help us to exercise our shareholder rights. 25% said the procedure to vote across border was too complex, too cumbersome. So the information that were required by the intermediaries were too extensive, for example, information that is not necessarily provided or needed when you vote at national level, and 4% gave other reasons, for example, that the dates were set too early before the general meeting, etc. When I say no or imperfect service provided by intermediaries, what we especially found is that a certain type of brokers or banks rejected to provide cross-border voting assistance or general meeting assistance to shareholders, and that were the neo-brokers, which on the one hand enabled a lot of young people to invest in shares. But when it comes to general meeting processes, we saw a lot of problems here, and I would like to hand over back to Guillaume to present the results of this section of the survey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christiane. And very shortly, yes, we added a specific research in this report on neo-brokers. As you know, neo-brokers are digital online brokers who offer brokerage and trading services directly to individual investors with low or even zero commissions. And in doing so, they attracted a large number of individual investors recently, especially since the COVID sanitary crisis, and especially young new generations of investors and digitally savvy investors who can trade through online tools, including with their smartphones. And this has developed quite a lot in the recent time, especially in the US, in Germany, the UK, in France. And of course, it is an opportunity for a lot of younger people to become new investors in stocks. So we did a study. We looked at the 5 neo-brokers who have business in Europe, and all of them have business in the major countries of Europe, Germany, UK, France, etc. And we looked at their contract agreements and their documentation to see whether individual clients based in Europe could exercise their voting rights on these new digital platforms. And unfortunately, the conclusion, as I would say, is even worse than the general results presented by Christiane. It shows important shortcomings from the new brokers in terms of transfer of information to shareholders, first thing, and second, in terms of execution of voting rights as soon as we are dealing with cross-border processes, meaning, for example, a German shareholder trading a non-German, like a French or Italian or other EU country domiciled stocks from an issuer who is in another member state. And this is, of course, in direct contradiction with the requirements of the Shareholders' Rights Directive 2. In fact, these new brokers publicly state that they have no obligations to inform shareholders and to facilitate their voting rights. Unfortunately, Article 4 of the Shareholder Rights Directive says you have an obligation as a broker, as an intermediary, to transmit the necessary information to the shareholders. And Article 5 and 6 require the brokers to the intermediaries to enhance the execution of the shareholders' voting rights. So we are concerned that the new generations of individual shareholders who have been attracted, and that's a good thing, to direct investments into the European economy via the new brokers, they could not be even aware that co-ownership comes with rights and responsibilities and duties. We have to admit that, of course, it is difficult for online brokers to comply with these rules because, as Christian mentioned, of the fragmented and the lack of digitalization of the intermediaries processes on a cross-border basis. And I would stop there by saying, you know, it's about time that in the 21st century, that European citizens as individual investors can, you know, exercise their fundamental rights, engage through their smartphones, you know, either by voting themselves or by giving a proxy, for example, to independent investor associations. Thank you.
Thank you, Guillaume. Let me turn, last but not least, to our policy recommendations that we developed out of the outcome of this survey. And first of all, we see an urgent need, as you can understand, that we should abolish all these barriers to shareholder engagement. We have seen, and Christiane mentioned it in detail, that we still see a lot of different requirements in the single EU member states to execute the rights of shareholders at general meetings. For example, some issuers' technical platform only accepts local but no foreign identity cards as proof of identity. And as a consequence, admission cards can consequently not be ordered. And this is, in our view, really discriminatory towards the non-national shareholders. The same holds true for intermediary costs and charges, which at the national level, as Christiane mentioned, are regularly borne by the issuer. So this is not a very good situation. Therefore, we believe the EU Commission should review SRD 2 to finally abolish these barriers. And I'm very glad and welcome some representatives of the EU Commission who are also present here today. We also would like to see a strong improvement in the procedure of the shareholder engagement process. First of all, we have to tackle the problems mentioned from these complex and fragmented voting chain that we discussed about, where life is really difficult. And we have the problem of the omnibus accounts. This was already explained by Christiane. So I think it is very important that these two problems are being addressed and solved in the good for the shareholders. And also, omnibus accounts make the life difficult when you try to identify the real shareholder with its real holdings. And we really see a strong need to make sure that these omnibus accounts do no longer hinder the processing of information between the issuer on the one side and the shareholder on the other side. Furthermore, we think simplification. I'm a very strong supporter of the KISS principle, keep it short and simple. So we need to simplify the information to the very necessary, because that also makes our life easier. For example, we would not necessarily need information on does the shareholder intend to vote and how on the general meeting. This is not necessary, so we really should look for better solutions. A very important point, and that's something we are discussing for the last 10 years, is the record date. We still see different record dates in different EU member states. Unfortunately, this is not yet harmonized, and it's leading to a lot of confusions in the process. As you have heard, it's sometimes difficult to get the admission card in time. Sometimes the record date is too close to the general meeting, and then you receive the admission card, but you receive it too late, so it doesn't really help. So what we really are looking for on the EU level, and this is really an address to the EU Commission, we do need to harmonize the record date in all EU member days. And the same actually should be true for all of the documentation requirements connected with the general meeting invitation and the exercise of the shareholder rights. So let me turn to another very important point, and I think this is one of the key points that was also mentioned by the high-level forum on the Capital Markets Union in their report, and that is the introduction of an EU-wide definition of shareholder. The term shareholder is still defined differently in the EU member states, and again, this doesn't help at all. So that's another thing we need to change in the future. And of course, very important point from the private investor's point of view, costs and charges. There should not be any discrimination between domestic and cross-border voting within the EU single market for individual and non-professional shareholders. So this is something, again, that the EU Commission should take an in-depth analysis of and should really try to work against these costs and charges. Also, and I think it's also a very good chance, we should use new technologies to foster the direct communication between issuer and shareholder. Academic research shows that permissioned blockchain solution may offer shareholders to take the opportunity in general meetings and participate and cast their votes independently from any intervention of this securities depository system. So blockchains, in short, would make our life easier, and especially the life of shareholders while exercising their rights. So Better Finance and DSW therefore call again on the EU Commission to further encourage the use of this modern technology. And final recommendation, and that's a very important point that Guillaume mentioned, yes, we should have a close look at the activities of the neo-brokers and how they comply with the SRD2 obligations in this whole process. And I think we should really look for good solutions, because we are on the one hand very much supportive of these smart brokers, but on the other hand, we also think they should be just as compliant as the other banks and financial institutions. So this was in very brief the policy recommendations from our side. And I would propose that we start now with the Q&A session. Of course, you're also allowed, and that's my address to the German journalists, to address questions in German. By the way, you have access to the complete study by the link you received. But I think we should start discussions. I think you will moderate the discussion. Thank you very much.
I will moderate this discussion. I'm basically inviting people to send their questions either through the chat on your right or raise your hand, and I will give you the floor if you in chronological order, basically. So please feel free to use the chat or to raise your hands should you have any questions.
If I may, I will start.
I will give Lindsay Rogerson the floor.
Okay.
Please unmute.
Thank you. It's really a question about what you're doing with the findings. So, for example, on the neo-broker non-compliance, have you notified the member state authorities or ESMA about the non-compliance so they can follow up and take further action? Thank you.
Maybe I can answer from the European side. Good morning, Lindsay. Thank you for joining and for your question. The first step was to do this research and to publish it today. But of course, the very next step will be to meet for better finance with ESMA and with the European Commission to report our findings, and more importantly, to share what Yela just presented, which are our policy recommendations. Again, for new brokers, to be fair, their business model is based on full digitalization, and most unfortunately, again, we are in the 21st century, the shareholder voting process is absolutely not digitalized cross-border. It's very fragmented. It's a very old system where they're still communicating via sometimes faxes between the intermediaries. So yes, we will of course notify, and we will ask the European supervisor and the European Commission for immediate action. And of course at member state levels, and I would maybe give the floor to our German friends, SARS, for example, German institutes.
Yes, thank you very much, Guillaume. Let me say, yes, of course, this is an issue for ESMA and also for the national authority, BaFin. And I can assure you we are in constant dialogue with the BaFin about this topic, not only about the problem of payment for order flow from the neo-brokers, but also on the issue of compliance with SRD2. The problem we see a little bit, and maybe that's something I should really mention, is that we do not see a supervisory authority that is really competently looking at these issues. We asked actually expressly BaFin about it, and BaFin said we are not responsible. This is not in our task and duties. So I think we really have to look for a specific supervision of these activities of the neo-brokers. It's not a typical bank activity, but nevertheless, there should be someone to take a look at how they comply with the SRD2 requirements. And of course, it would be ideally if we also would have such an authority on the European level.
Thank you very much. I would like to pass the floor on to Marie-Pascale Peltre, who has a question for us as well.
Yes, good morning. I have a kind of naive question relating to especially the French situation. I understand that in this last year, there was only one company, Amundi, which held a general meeting with full direct interactive access. I understand that in other countries it's different. And the situation here, it seems that it's a kind of a prejudice to the kind of problems to exercising the rights of all rights of shareholders. Does the SRD preconize prone something about that, or it's just up to the banks? Because I think it's the fault of the banks if it was not possible to do fully interactive shareholders meeting last year in France.
Yes, maybe I can say a few words on this. Yes, we have seen in several member states, especially in France, for example, and in Italy, that meetings due to the COVID situation were held behind closed doors. So shareholders in certain member states indeed were not able to participate in person or online in a general meeting. But there were, in several other cases, respondents said it was only a proxy voting opportunity provided to me, which had nothing to do with the COVID restrictions. SRD2, of course, does not deal with the COVID restrictions. The emergency laws had set aside a lot of shareholder rights since 2020, which you can find in another report we produced, DSW and Better Finance together, The Future of General Meetings, which we released last year. But the restrictions of shareholder rights could, in our study, only partially be explained with the COVID situation.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have another question from Rolf Obertheis in the chat. I will read it out. One moment, I just had another message come in. So could you name specific banks which charge shareholders or who provide bad information, and specific neo-brokers? And what are the different definitions of shareholders? Thank you.
We did on purpose not include the names of the banks and the neo-brokers in the survey. We did not want to name and shame certain banks. What you find in the survey, in the report, is exemplary fee schedules of certain banks where you can see the different kinds of fees. But we did not want to blame certain banks. It was just to provide a general overview. The different definitions of shareholders, there are mainly two. We have the, let me say, continental European one, which says the shareholder. You will find the definitions, by the way, in the report as well, which defines the shareholder as the beneficial owner, so the one who really is what I would call the end investor. Another one is the predominantly Anglo-Saxon understanding, which still holds true for a few member states. Other member states, that is the nominee concept. So there, the shareholder, it's simple, is the nominee account holder. So in principle, the bank, your bank, is the shareholder in the sense of the Shareholder Rights Directive. The problem is that the Shareholder Rights Directive has never defined the term shareholder at European level, but leaves it to each member state to define the term shareholder, which in a cross-border context really brings up problems for all participants, for the shareholder himself or herself, but also for the intermediaries, because they do not really know to whom to transmit the information.
Thank you, Christiane. We have another question in the chat from Octavio Viana. In Portugal, we have several problems related to the participation of shareholders in general meetings. The declarations certifying the quality of shareholders issued by intermediaries who are not registered in the Central of Securities are not considered valid, even if these intermediaries are registered in the Securities Market Commission and in the Bank of Portugal. The Shareholders Portuguese Association has several lawsuits in the Supreme Court of Justice regarding this issue, awaiting a preliminary ruling to the Court of Justice of the European Union. What do you think about it?
Do you want me to answer again? I think it sounds like a problem with the implementation of the Shareholder Rights Directive. I think the right way to check if the Shareholder Rights Directive has been transposed the right way into Portuguese law is to go to the European Court, which the Portuguese Shareholder Association obviously did. But I'm not too familiar with the Portuguese law, I must say, so I cannot say much further on this point.
Thank you, Cristiano. There's another question for which the person is asking for the answer in German. So it's a question from Brigitte Scholtes. Are there countries in which non-local shareholder rights are more discriminated than in others?
Well, it depends on what you consider as discriminatory. If I think about the costs, for example, costs were extremely high in Denmark for Danish and Slovenian shareholders, as an example. Other shareholders, for example, especially from France, said they were offered only proxy voting opportunities when trying to vote in other countries. But we could not find an overall one country that was outstandingly bad or outstandingly better than other countries.
Thank you, Cristiano. Ms. Scholtes asked for the answer in German, but I believe this will be fine.
Vielleicht darf ich noch mal ganz kurz ergänzen auf Deutsch, if you allow, in German, very briefly. Es gibt natürlich auch Länder, wo man, und ich glaube, das betrifft, korrigieren Sie mich, Frau Hörz, Spanien, Frankreich, wo man tatsächlich schon diskriminierende Voraussetzungen schafft, wenn man eine nationale ID vorlegen muss. Also das ist ja etwas, was doch irgendwie aus unserer Sicht ganz klar gegen EU-Recht und gegen die Vorgaben von SRD2 verstößt.
Das betraf Spanien in der Tat, das ist richtig. Ich finde es, ja, das sind halt immer einzelne Fälle. Es ist jetzt ein bisschen schwierig, darauf dann zu schließen, dass das Land insgesamt Aktionärsrechte mehr diskriminiert als andere Länder.
Thank you. There is another follow-up question by Octavio Viana. Other case is when the shareholders don't want to vote with all the shares they have. This happens, for example, when the shareholders have shares in different intermediaries. When this happens, they are not allowed to attend the shareholders' general meeting because the issuer considers that the shareholder need to vote with all shares. What do you think about this?
I don't see any requirement in the Shareholder Rights Directive that shareholders need to vote with all of their shares. In principle, shareholdings can be split and shareholders must be enabled to vote only part of their shares, although we always favor a full shareholder engagement. Shareholders engaging with all of their shares, but still I don't see any requirement in the directive to do so, but I don't know about Portuguese law again.
Thank you. There's another question from Rolf Obertreis. If I look at the free example of SEB, the fee for pre-registration for attendance and for voting could be on the whole 2,500 SEK, and for EEA markets 7,150 SEK. Is this correct?
I would need to double check myself, but I think, yeah, it should be right. I think, well, let me have a look at the fee schedule myself, but I think it was that you had to pay within Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and Norway. It was much cheaper to attend than in other EEA markets. But your figures are right.
Thank you very much. I don't know, at the moment I have no other questions. Yes, there's a Miss Rogerson, please feel free to take the floor.
Thank you. I just got a quick question on the subject of technology. It's one of your recommendations, and Guillaume, you mentioned, it's ridiculous in the current day that you can't use your smartphone. I just wondered if you could share a little bit about what you think. Is it a deliberate sort of reluctance on the part of intermediaries to allow this, or is it actually just the system is so fragmented, as you've pointed out, and so antiquated that it's not actually possible to develop the technology at the moment? And if it's the latter, what needs to happen in order for us to be able to vote cross-border on our smartphones? Thank you.
Christiana, do you want to answer, or?
I can. In principle, we would need to start from scratch. We would have to build up a complete new architecture at intermediaries level. It is antiquated, outdated, and obviously not yet fit for purpose. As I said, intermediaries do not speak the same languages across borders. So blockchain can be a solution. DLT, distributed ledger technology, can be a solution, and at least we think it should be embraced and by the Commission, and we have seen examples where it works already. So why not trying it? But maybe Guillaume wants to add something.
Yeah, clearly it's not the second option, Lindsay, it's the first one. We have, as Christiana said, a very antiquated and fragmented process currently held by financial intermediaries. Technologically, it is very possible. For example, there is an experiment right now in Estonia where you already have digital ID, and the Estonian citizens are going to be able to vote directly on their smartphone. But of course, at this stage, only for Estonian domiciled shares. Yeah, we are in the 21st century. It's a question of political will. Maybe one of our proposals could help. Sometimes you use the carrot and the stick. This time the stick could be that the European Union requires that the cost of voting is not higher for cross-border voting inside the EU than for domestic votes. Then it will force the intermediary chain to become much more effective. And the simple way, the best way to do that is to digitalize the process.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions in the chat, or I have no raised hands. Does anybody else have a question at this stage? I believe we have reached the end of questions. I think we can safely wrap up the press conference then, unless Guillaume, Cristiano, or Jelle have something else to add.
No, thank you very much, Arnaud. And I would like to thank you all that you participated and actively asked questions. And we would like to stay in discussions with you. And please take a look in the long version of the study, because it's really interesting. And as you noticed, the result, the outcome isn't disaster from our point of view. So thank you very much from my side.
And thank you very much from our side. And the report is being published today, the press release as well. And we are, of course, open to any further discussion with you. Have a good day.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Before closing the meeting, I will put the links to the report and the press release in the chat. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.